The final edition of the CBB Central podcast before 2019. Brad and Kevin coming to you on December the 30th. You'll probably get this one on the 31st on New Year's Eve. Brad, a pretty quiet week in college basketball. We made it through the quietest week before the end of the season, really. I mean, there will be a D1 college basketball game on every single day from now until the end of the season. That's a pretty good feeling, I would certainly think.
Absolutely. I mean, this was a very slow week, although yesterday was fun. I mean, the UCLA game was kind of funny to watch. I mean, you kind of knew it was going to happen because like Liberty's not bad by any stretch. I mean, they're top 100 certainly. But just the name brand of Liberty, not even being like a traditional power of a one bid league. They come in and you could just feel it was going to happen. I mean, just the way that the whole conference was going, the whole Pac-12 was trending in the wrong direction. Arizona State had already lost to Princeton, and Washington State had already lost to Santa Clara. Colorado drops like two games, like two terrible losses over in Diamond Head, and then it was just the perfect culmination was UCLA laying a major egg against a solid Liberty team, but a game that you have to win, being at home and being UCLA.
Yeah, I think the whole UCLA buzz has caused us to maybe forget a little bit about, this was the bottom out weekend for the Pac-12. And I mean, everything down from Santa Clara beating Washington State, Arizona State, after they finally build momentum, people are like, there's one good team in the Pac-12. Arizona State loses to Princeton, and now they're Ken Thomas 49, and they look like a bubble team. Like for reference, Northwestern's at 48, Penn State's at 45. Like that's the team that everyone believes to be the best team in the Pac-12 right now. It's scary, man. It really is for that league. But we really should, tackle this UCLA story because the Liberty lost now the fourth in a row. I mean, individually, they've all been a top 80 KenPom teams. They lost to Belmont by 2. They lost to Cincinnati, getting blown out. They got handled by Ohio State. And then they lose to Liberty yesterday, as you said. It seems more and more like this might not even get through the season for Steve Alford. I mean, at this point, it's just really tough because there was no way he was coming back anyway. But there's no real way of saving money by waiting till the end of the season. I know there was the buyout drops from $3.6 million to $1 million on April 30th. You can't wait until April 30th to fire him. I mean, that would be such a small time move from a school that considers itself, the elite of the elite in college basketball. I think the question for me, Brad, is do you just do it now? I mean, Jason McIntyre tweeted about it from Fox Sports that he's hearing that it could happen as soon as today. There's definitely buzz beyond just his tweet that it could happen very soon, potentially tomorrow morning. We'll see whether he's the head coach come 2019. I think it's a foregone conclusion he'll be gone by March, if not. But I mean, what would you do? Because to me, I think there's a little bit of upside in moving on right now. Then you can get the head start. You could feel out Earl Watson and Fred Hoiberg. I honestly think if those two are guys you're going to legitimately consider, you could hire them on February 1st. And it's going to be tough to build a full staff because everybody's employed. But those guys could, start recruiting. Those guys could start meeting with boosters, start, building relationships that are important. And if nothing else, just get settled. I mean, the first few days of being a college basketball head coach is a blur. Press conferences and so much going on, dealing with recruits, building a staff. I mean, if you could spread that timeline, I think that could help, especially given the work they're going to have to get done, build relationships with the players, try to get them to stay, not transfer, not leave for the draft. I mean, what say you here, Brad? Do you think you move on right now, or do you wait till the end of the year?
So I have a few kind of separate UCLA thoughts. So apologize if I go on for a little bit here, but in terms of the initial question of, can you move on? Should you move on? It's interesting because, two of the top candidates are currently unemployed, right? Watson and Hoiberg, could start without having to leave any team. And they both have enough cachet where it's not like they're reaching. So I think that you could.
Just like Rick Pitino as well. Don't sleep.
Yeah. The assistant stuff is is interesting though, because how would you fill out a staff among guys who aren't available? You know, like guys aren't going to leave the teams. Like an assistant coach isn't going to leave their team, I don't think, at this juncture to join like an impromptu UCLA staff. But I think it's interesting because you could wait until April 30th, being that you're the biggest job, right? You're going to be the biggest available job. So you have all the leverage in the world where, like, say Minnesota opens, say DePaul opens. I don't know who else would open, like Wake Forest, right? If Fred Hoiberg thinks he can get UCLA, he's not going to take Minnesota, or like if they have like a handshake agreement in place, he's not going to take Minnesota or DePaul or Wake Forest, like a lesser job, when UCLA with more money and more prestige could potentially be right there. So I think that's a possibility. It does look bad, but with the amount of leverage they have, I think that's not a bad move per se.
I'm just going to jump in there.
Yep.
My thing is not, it's not money. It's not you're going to lose a coach that you want because, you know, you're going to wait for UCLA. My thing is players. I mean, even if it's a handshake agreement, you're going to get it done on May 1st. I mean, let's take Jalen Hands. I mean, we think he's probably going to go pro, but you've got no chance of keeping Jalen Hands if you're waiting till May 1st to decide on a head coach. I mean, a guy, he's not going to wait around. I mean, I guess he might decide to stay after the combine, but I think you got to move quick and know, because you've got Hands. I mean, Wilkes is probably gone as well, but you might be able to convince him to stay. All the recruits, I think, you know, your entire 2019 class is going to be signed. I think I'm trying to think of the recruits who were still out there on May 1st of last year. What, Jordan Brown? Was he the best guy?
And then all like the reclass guys.
Yeah, reclass, but I think to me, it's $2.5 million. Like, to be in you, that's certainly a lot of money. But there's people at UCLA who can make that money happen tomorrow. We talk all the time about how this is such a tough job because of the boosters and the expectations. Well, those boosters better get out and get money, because, like, I'm sorry, that is a small. I think that's such a small time move. If you're waiting it out until May 1st, you're setting back recruiting. You're potentially setting back the roster, and, you know, all for $2.5 million. I think that's pretty crazy, because that sets you. I think it would be almost impossible to win in year one if you didn't let the guy get started until May 1st. And I think it would set you back in year two as well. I mean, obviously, a guy like a Hoiberg, a guy like an Errol Watson, a guy like Eric Musselman is going to bring cachet. They're going to bring recruits eventually. But I don't think UCLA is a job where you just take a transition year and have a bad year so you can save $2 million. Like, you're not, like, this is kind of what people were talking about, like at Siena. Like, do you wait a year and you set yourself back and have enough money? But, you know, you can't compare Siena to UCLA. Like, you have to make a move when you're going to make a move. Like, this thing's a joke. People are fired up. I think you move on just to make a statement. Like, this is UCLA. We're not gonna let you lose to Liberty and Belmont in back-to-back bye games at home.
So my kind of second thought on this it intertwines with that last point a little bit. So let's say Hoiberg gets hired right on May 1st. The remnants of the roster is certainly talented enough from like a recruiting rank standpoint, even I think just from a general standpoint, that they could still win. I mean, you're going to have Tiger Campbell and Sharif O'Neal, who everyone apparently is thinking were like God's gift to earth, because a lot of people are earnestly saying, as like a legitimate excuse, you know, this was my second thought, that Tiger Campbell and Sharif O'Neal would be the difference makers, which, you know, might be true. You know, when Campbell got hurt, we remarked about how they only had, you know, 2 ball handlers. Now Jalen Haynes is like the only ball handler. That's true. People are bringing that up as a reason as to why UCLA is struggling, and that is true. But that's UCLA's fault. You can't recruit only 2 ball handlers, have one get hurt, and then use that as like a legitimate excuse. That's like, no one's making you have 2 ball handlers. That's your fault that you only had 2 ball handlers. Ask Roy Williams with Stillman White. Like, the fact that people are using that as an excuse is like unbelievable. That's like saying about Texas, like, oh, you know, they would be much better if they just had some shooters. Well, that's your fault. You got to get the shooters. Or like any team with like big men, you know, it's it's mind-boggling how people are using that as an excuse.
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is I don't think Steve Alford should be being fired because of this year. If he was being successful throughout his tenure and doing what UCLA expects, I don't think this year would be a problem. I mean, it wouldn't be good. I mean, there'd be a little buzz, but I mean, he is underwhelmed for his talent level in every single season he's been a head coach at UCLA, except for the Lonzo year. Like, this is just the year that it bottoms out. But like, there've been a few years where they didn't even deserve to make the NCAA tournament. Like, they've been an 11 seed, 3 of the 5 years he's been there? I mean, it's just bad. He hasn't done the job he's been expected to do. And I think, for me, it's just this year's going to be the year that costs him. But I was ready to move on last year if I was a UCLA fan. And I know UCLA fans who were.
Yeah, because I mean, I think another problem that a lot of people had with UCLA was that Alford was playing his son, but his son was like one of the best players. I mean, Bryce Alford was legitimately very good.
I loved him.
He should have been playing. He was playing, and he played pretty well. Got a few summer league looks, I think. But in terms of all right, so we hire Hoiberg on May 1st. This team still has, even if Hands and Wilkes leave, probably need another point guard, which we were just talking about. But they have top 50 guys at every position, guys who, this is a very young team this year. Another thing that people use it as an excuse, which is also UCLA's fault. No one tells you have to go young. I mean, if I just hate when people use that as an excuse. Like, it's your fault that your team's too young to be as good as they should be. But anyway, I mean, you'll have Bernard, Singleton, Riley, and Hill, and Moses Brown will all be sophomores. Another year of development. Chris Smith was someone who reclassified, so he'll be the age of a sophomore as a junior. Prince Ali will be back as a senior. He's okay, but he's very experienced, something that they need. Campbell and O'Neal back from injuries. They have Jamie Jacques, who's a top 75 recruit. The cupboard is not bare, even if they lost Hands and Wilkes. And these guys, maybe they'll just want to transfer, but the reports I'm seeing is they don't like Alford anyway. They have this great platform at UCLA, and they have potential playing time. So it makes sense for them to stay.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it is weird. Like, I don't expect guys. I don't think it's not like a mid-major where, like, if you hold out for too long, we're just going to transfer. Because, I mean, how many of these guys are going to be in a better situation than they're in at UCLA? I don't think many.
Maybe Prince Ali grad transfers.
Even then, is it a better situation? I mean, it might be a better winning situation, but it won't be a better basketball situation. I mean,
there might play like 30 minutes a game somewhere or something instead of like 20. But
yeah. I mean, gut feel here, Brad. Before we move on, because I don't have a ton more on this. Does he coach their next game? The third against Stanford.
Yes.
Is he their coach?
I think so.
All right, I'm gonna go no. I'm gonna roll the dice here and say he's done.
Sudden. Like, I understand that they lost both bye games, but to fire someone in the middle of the season, kind of that close after the bad events that weren't like
anyway
or anything, it seems sudden.
He's done anyway. I mean, regardless, as we said,
definitely.
I think he's done on New Year's Eve. I don't think he coaches in 2019. Let's touch on a few things just from yesterday's college basketball slate, because the rest of the week wasn't really enough to talk about. I guess TCU won Diamond Head, as we all really expected. But yeah, I mean, we're going to do our stock watch, a midseason stock watch, which I'm pretty excited about after we kind of touch on yesterday. Biggest thing for me, I was watching a lot of football, but I watched a good amount of that St. John's Seton Hall game on my tablet while I was watching the football on the main screen. Seton Hall got gifted this win. I mean, obviously St. John's missed those free throws down the stretch that they shouldn't have, and didn't execute the way they should have, but they got jobbed.
Yeah, I couldn't watch this game because I'm at the station, but I was furiously updating Twitter when I saw that it was a close game with like 2 minutes to go. And then all of a sudden I see all this like, oh my God, which was not very descriptive. People just saying like, oh my God, I can't believe it. Like the Rock is going nuts. Like, what happened? But that's another situation of a guy that, shouldn't really have been playing, right? The guy Shavar Reynolds, like, he's not very good, but playing him as much as they did so far probably leads him to being prepared enough to hit that game-winning shot. So good for Seton Hall. Really tough for St. John's because they really it's tough because you'll see a lot of like bracketology so far that have like St. John's in or have Ole Miss or Washington, teams with nothing of substance on their record. They've just avoided bad losses, and it gets to a point. I don't know when this point is where it's like if you haven't done anything now, it's too late, and now you're out of the bracketology. So I mean, this was a perfect opportunity for St. John's to add like a legit quality win, resume building win, and to have it taken from them. That's very, very rough. But they'll have another chance. I think on New Year's Day they have Marquette at home. Certainly a beatable team.
Yeah, I think St. John's will be fine. I think they'll get in. And I think the one other thing to note is they got gifted one against VCU early in the year where Marcus Evans got fouled by Pons and there was just no call down the stretch. I think my frustration with it was just, the ref obviously blew an inadvertent whistle. Like, I don't know if you've watched the replay of that. I'm sure you've seen it. I mean, the ref blows the whistle, looks at his partner. He's watching the play on the sideline. He's not watching the clock. He looks at his partner, and then he throws his hands up like, what did I just do? Like, refs are human. You're human. I'm human. Basketball players are human. They miss free throws. They make mistakes. Just own up to it. Don't hide behind this. It was a clock error thing. I saw the clock out of the corner of my eye not start right away, and I blew it dead. No, you blew the whistle when you weren't supposed to, and you cost St. John's a chance to win. Does that stink? Yeah, it stinks. And I'd be furious if I was a St. John's fan. But I'd rather them take it in the chest when it's so clear what happened.
No, I can totally agree with that. I saw a lot of people referencing this Big East tournament like 7 years ago, like the first round, like when the Big East had like 16 teams. And what was it, St. John's and Rutgers? And like they thought the game was over and the guys started running with the ball and it wasn't over, but they didn't call the travel. Do you know what I'm referencing? Or
I've seen a few games with that similar like circumstance. I don't remember that game in particular, but I know the type of play you're referring to. Yeah. But it's crazy. Yeah, that's just it's a brutal missed call if you're St. John's. I think they'll be fine. I think they'll win plenty of games and get in. I think quantity over quality will be there for them. A few other notes. By the way, I really like the Seton Hall team. Like, I'm starting to like them. Like, they don't really execute well down the stretch, but they're fun. Like, they play a lot of close games. Miles Powell's good. They compete. Like, Mamu's fun. Like, they're a fun team. They're not a great team by any means, but they're a fun team.
Yeah, Mamu Kilishvili is going to be really, really good the next few years. He has a significant upside. Powell's awesome. McKnight's solid. Kale's coming along. Torian Thompson sucks, but I mean they have Ike Obiagu coming in next year, so it's going to be an interesting team.
A few other big ones in college basketball yesterday. Western Kentucky hosts Wisconsin and pulls off a big win. My biggest takeaway from this was just like Western Kentucky is going to have to win the conference tournament, but who wants to see them? Because Bassey's starting to come along. Hollingsworth is terrific. Banton's starting to really establish himself as a point guard. They'll get Lamonte Bearden back pretty soon. Jared Savage can score the ball. Josh Anderson's good. Like, they're super talented and super deep. They just were better than Wisconsin yesterday. Wisconsin's going to be fine, I think. Ethan Happ's still really good. Davison went off. I mean, in games when Davison goes off, if they're not going to win, that's pretty kind of scary for Wisconsin. But I think Western Kentucky just literally had better players on the floor. More talented players, certainly.
And that's why it's so important to win non-conference games, because you get teams like Western Kentucky who, if they're in your conference, they've pretty much eliminated themselves, barring a major run in terms of an at-large bid, but they're good enough to beat you. And so that's why it's so important for the other teams in your conference to win non-conference games, so you don't get a league maybe like the Pac. I mean, the thing about the Pac-12 this year is that the teams aren't good. But like maybe like the A10, where like a UMass or like a URI is like good enough to beat a St. Louis or like another team with at-large aspirations, and kind of ruin their season. Where if things went as they should and those teams played to their talent level, they wouldn't have these bad losses.
Yeah, WKU's resume is just hilarious. They have home wins over St. Mary's and Wisconsin. They have a neutral court against West Virginia, and they have a neutral court over the road win at Arkansas, I should say. but they also have a loss at Indiana State, which is a good team, not horrible. They have a loss to Troy at home. They have a loss at Belmont. They have a loss at Missouri State. Like, it's just weird. Like, they got to figure if they figure it out. I mean, they're going to be scary. A few other just notes from the day in hoops. Florida boat races Butler. I'm really just kind of selling Butler. We'll talk about them a little bit in our stock watch, I think, because I have them down as a team I'm selling. I just don't think they're very good.
No, I felt that way in the preseason. I was waffling, for my last spot in the in my preseason bracketology between like Butler, Ohio State, and Minnesota, and clearly Ohio State's the best one of those three. But I think Butler's going to find themselves right on the cut line again. Yeah, the offense always puts up like good numbers, like good like Ken Palm numbers and stuff. But it's very reliant on Kamar Baldwin and then Jorgensen, who are both smaller guards that are playing the 2 and the 3. So like they don't have a lot of size. They have a lot of one-dimensional players. Like Fowler, he just stinks, and then Brunk is like a finish guy. You have guys like Badley that are energy but aren't that great offensively. You have guys like McDermott that are shooters. Guy like Thompson is only a defender and like a passer, but he's terrible in offense. They sag way off him. So there's a lot of like weirdly one-dimensional kind of mismatched pieces there.
Yeah, no, I didn't watch a ton of that game, but every time I've watched Butler except that Indiana game, I just have not come away impressed. A few other notable results. Arizona State, as we mentioned, loses to Princeton. That's a pretty bad one. Nevada has not a ton of trouble with Utah, struggled a little bit in the first half, then found a way. A FAU team missing multiple starters goes to Champaign and beats Illinois, and now Brad Underwood's team's 4-9. Brad, I mean, that's not good for Brad Underwood.
No, so that was a great hire, right? I mean, you're Illinois. You get a guy who had unprecedented mid-major success. Then, in his 1 year at high major, takes a team that no one expected to be that good, and it makes a tournament. I mean, they had Jawan Evans, but that was an overachieving job. In his first year, we talk about all these new hires and they need like a year or 2 or 3 to get going. He gets it in 1 year at a high major school, and they're able to poach a high major successful coach to a like a lateral move, and it just hasn't worked out. So you did everything right, but it's not looking good for Coach Underwood.
Right, and I think if anyone would have questioned this hire, they would have said, is he going to recruit Illinois? Is he going to, get St. Louis kids? Is he going to get, is he going to get Chicago kids? And he got Mark Smith in year 1. He got Ayo in year 2. And it's still just a failure. Like, I still think Brad Underwood's a pretty good coach, and I still think he'll probably figure it out. But, like, are they going to give him enough time to? I mean, that's the question. I think if he can keep the roster that he has this year together and then fill in some pieces that he needs to play the style he wants to play. I mean, that Oklahoma State team fit his system really well. He still doesn't really have the guys that fit his system. He got the guards in this year. He still needs more just like athletes and bigs to run at you. If he can get those guys in, I think he's got a shot. But I mean, Illinois fans are going to have to be patient, and I don't think they're going to be.
I mean, they're in the Final Five for Kofi Cookburn, but I think he's probably UConn at this point. And they got Antoine January, who's a top 150 recruit at the center position. I think they'll probably be okay at center, but they need an upgrade at the 3 and the 4 for next year very badly. I mean, this year's over, obviously. But if they can get like a high-level grad transfer or something in there for both the 3 and the 4, maybe they can flip it next year. But it's going to be tough because Ayo Dosunmu is a good enough prospect where I think he can leave at any time. I mean, he's been up and down this year, but just like that profile, like the big athletic guard, he can defend multiple positions, excellent defender, has shot it better than I thought he would this year because I saw him over the summer U18s and he could not shoot at all. So he's a very appealing prospect. That's something where a team that's going like this, if they lose someone early entry, I mean, that is the death knell for them.
Yeah, and I just do want to point out, they could have had Ayo and Taylor Horton-Tucker. Taylor Horton-Tucker is averaging 15, 6, and 3, shooting 42% from the field, just slashing like crazy, almost a 2-to-1 assist to turnover. And Iowa's AAU people ruined that. So not great. The big game of the day before we move on to Stock Watch, Kentucky-Louisville, big rivalry. Kentucky wins that one comfortably. They were in control for most of the second half. I didn't get a chance to watch much of this one because I was at a riveting showdown between Siena and Cal Poly, Brad. But Kentucky really seems to be turning a corner.
Yeah, Ashton Higgins was awesome in this game. He even hit some threes, which was something he's been very hesitant to shoot jumpers. But I mean, he's just fantastic on the defensive end. Had a great steal at midcourt where they tried to advance the ball, and he just jumped up and just grabbed it out of the air. Really impressive play, and he's their best point guard. Like he has the best vision, he has the best kind of point guard instincts. So he's certainly established himself ahead of Quickly, and obviously Quade Green, who's now gone. So I think that they have an answer at point guard, and then Travis is playing better. PJ Washington's a really nice player, like a college star. I mean, and then Tyler Hero's hitting shots. Keldon Johnson is top 10 pick. This team is really coming together. If they can get some more contributions from their bench, I think this is a team that is certainly on upward trajectory.
Yeah, they look dangerous to me. I mean, they're starting to figure out how to run their offense, whether it's through Higgins or a little bit through Washington. Keldon doing not a ton of initiation, but I think this team's pretty fun. And as you said, Reed Travis is starting to take the next step. So excited to watch them in SEC play. Still think Tennessee probably has a leg up. Not sure about Auburn. I think Kentucky could really fight for that second spot in the SEC.
I think they will. And then in terms of Louisville, I still just don't know what to make of this team. I mean, they have a good enough resume where at this point, I made a preseason, like an end of non-conference bracketology prediction earlier today. It is tough to fill the field. Like Louisville is getting in, maybe even if they were to go like 8-10 or something. I mean, Louisville's in unless they take a ton of losses to the bottom of the ACC, which is super ugly this year. That bottom, but
put in Northwestern, Brad. Do it.
I did.
Oh, let's go.
I mean, like Ray, I'll just go through the cut line really quick here of like the teams. So I've 7 Big East teams in. I have 10 Big Ten teams in because here's my 11 seeds because the 11 seeds are going to have both playing games because like I have St. Louis as a 12, like New Mexico State as a 12. So Northwestern, Butler, Iowa, Creighton, Minnesota, and Central Florida. And my teams that are just missing, Temple, Washington, Arizona, Maryland, San Francisco, Alabama, Arkansas.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
That's our cut line. That is a very makeable cut line. And then, I mean, so I listed 7 teams that missed the cut. I literally cannot think of another team to put in that kind of group of 7.
Well, it starts to be like, what do you talk about for a team like Penn State, which I don't think anyone really thinks is an NCAA tournament team, but they've got a good win over NC State. Not NC State, excuse me, Virginia Tech. They lost to NC State. They lost by 2 to DePaul, which isn't going to be good. They lost by 2 to Bradley, which isn't going to be good. They lost to Bama, but like they could build like Penn State is not off the bubble. Like they could find a way to build a resume.
The Big Ten is just going to hand out quality wins. That's why non-conference is so important because if you play in the Big Ten, you're just going to be handed the quality wins. Like Rutgers is going to have like two quality wins at the end of this. It's just they're just going to fall into your lap.
Yeah, I completely agree. Let's move on to the Stock Watch. Brad, why don't you explain a little bit about the plan? You were the one who texted me with the idea today. I was all in. What's the showdown for the Stock Watch we're doing today?
So we're going to each give 3 teams that we're buying, selling, and holding, like kind of how a stock would work. So we're going to look back, whatever, March 17th, whatever the selection Sunday is, or maybe even we'll do after the NCAA tournament. We'll look back and see how much theoretical money that we've made with teams that we're buying, selling, and holding. Should I explain how I'm sure that people know how stocks work even better, or certainly better than I do, but trying to make money at the end of the season, so you want to buy low and so on. But I'm sure people will get it.
Yeah, I think they'll pick up pretty quickly. Why don't you start with a buy?
All right, I think the first team that I'm going to buy Villanova. I've seen a lot of people say that, like, if you're not picking Marquette to win the Big East, you're either uninformed or you haven't watched the season. You're just basing it off Villanova's brand name. But I think that you could certainly make a case for Villanova. They've certainly played better. They are a young team that is susceptible to some bad losses, but the losses weren't terribly bad. And I mean, they just played Kansas tough on the road. They just destroyed UConn. And as these kind of young freshmen, sophomores who were thrust into playing time, kind of gel and progress, I think Villanova certainly has a case to win the Big East.
Yeah, that's a fair buy. I mean, it's definitely a buy low and the potential sell high if they can put it together. Here's what I'm kind of buying somewhat high, but I don't think it's as high as people think it should be. Michigan State. This is a team I came in a little down on. Most people have them right in like the 9-10 range nationally. I did a little digging on them this week, prepping to see them play Northwestern this coming week. And I was like super impressed just kind of looking at their profile. I haven't watched a ton of them really since that Kansas game to open the year. But I'm looking back and like they're impressing me on defense a lot more than I thought I'd be impressed. And with the exception of that Louisville loss, which is a road loss to a NCAA tournament team, I mean, they're top 25 KenPom defense. Their offense is as good as I thought it would be. Nick Ward's been terrific, drawing fouls at a super high rate. I think this team belongs in that elite tier right now in college basketball, and I think they're being seen right just outside that. I think they're a national title contender, and so for that reason, I think it's worth a buy here. Even though national consensus, I might only be 2 or 3 spots higher than the national consensus, but in that range, I think there's a lot of money to be made there.
That's a very good pick because that's a team that I have as like the best team in my second tier, but they're certainly ascending to that top status. Second buy, so I made a list of 7 teams that I would consider buying. So I'm trying to parse between which 3 I should bring up. I think St. Louis. I'm going to buy St. Louis. I don't think that they're going to be an at-large caliber team, but I do think that they'll be the clear favorite in the A10 and maybe end up with like a 15-3 record, which would certainly be better than where people have them right now. I think most people I've seen a lot of VCU predictions of winning the league. I've seen some Davidson. I think St. Louis is still probably clearly the best team. And if they were to run the table and have like a crazy record, they don't have terrible losses. I think the worst losses, they have a neutral to Pitt and they have at Southern Illinois, I think are the worst losses on their resume. And they have wins at Seton Hall and over Butler at home. So they've beaten some at-large-ish teams. Seton Hall, that'll certainly be a quality win. So I think that if things break right, I think that this could be a big money maker.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, I actually had VCU as a team I was looking at either buying or holding. Didn't wind up featuring them in this, but I think they're probably the best team in the A10, partially because they've competed in every game they play. They're really good on defense. I think they're a better coach than Travis Ford's group. I just don't come away impressed when I watch them, St. Louis, but the talent's all there. They have the resume where they're the only team I think that have a legitimate enough resume to push for an at-large. I mean, save VCU getting going 16-2 and the Texas win looking really good. It's hard for me to say that they're gonna push for an at-large. Davidson same way.
They have the neutral court win over Temple too, which right now is more of a blank slate, but we'll see. Kind of where Temple ends up in the AAC.
So my second one, I think this is an interesting one because it's a team that I think a lot of people have given credit of its wins more to the teams it has lost to, and that might be fair. But Cincinnati's quietly playing pretty good basketball at this point. They're playing their great defense as you expect, but their offense has started to pick it up. They lost that opening season game to Ohio State. Also have a loss to Mississippi State on the road. otherwise, unblemished. They beat Xavier team that's down. They beat a UCLA team that's down. They have a win against Ole Miss that I think will age fairly nicely because I'm a pretty big Ole Miss guy at this point. But if their offense can continue to play at this level, they're going to be fine. And they're taking care of the basketball better than they were. They're only turning it over 11 times a game. Their turnover margin's almost +4 per contest. Jaron Cumberland's playing good basketball. Keith Williams is starting to assert himself. I don't know that this team can beat Houston, but I think it's a pretty clear NCAA tournament team at this point. Maybe not resume-wise, but eye test-wise.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see where this AAC kind of ends up because they haven't really had many bad losses. So they have a lot of teams that are kind of still working with a blank slate, and we'll see, if they can kind of beat themselves up. I mean, like UConn doesn't have a bad loss. Temple, Cincinnati, UCF has the bad loss to FAU. But for my third team, tough one for the third pick. I'm deciding between Texas and Purdue. I think I'm going to go with Purdue. I think it's a team that is still probably borderline top 25, but they're being kind of discriminated against because of the quantity of losses. I think that, they have a lot of new faces in prominent roles, guys kind of moving up from reserves to starters. So as they kind of grow into those roles, then you have a star in Carson Edwards. And with the Big Ten, is just going to hand out quality wins like candy. I think Purdue could easily get back in the top 25 by the end of the season.
See, this is interesting because I am selling on Purdue, actually. I don't know, just kind of give my thoughts on that. I just don't love the supporting cast. I mean, I'm just not there to consistently beat high major clubs. I think in the Big Ten, which is going to be a gauntlet, I think they'll find a way into the NCAA tournament because they'll find a way to win enough games because of Carson Edwards. But I think in that gauntlet of a schedule that they're going to play, I mean, obviously no run will compare to what they did when they played Florida State, Michigan, Maryland, Texas, and Notre Dame, with 4 of those on road or neutral courts in 5 games. But I mean, that's the type of team that they're going to be playing all the time in the Big Ten. Now they only lost by 1 point, against Florida State. They only lost by 4 against Texas. They lost by 8 against Notre Dame. Like, to me, they're not a team that's going to win a lot of those close games and age into a top 25 team. I think they're going to kind of hover on the bubble. I think they're going to wind up regressing more towards that Northwestern, Minnesota, Maryland tier than they are creep up to the top 25. I'm selling the Boilermakers.
Do you want to give your last buy too?
Yeah, absolutely. My last buy kind of went between a few different teams here. I think I'm going to buy some Clemson stock. It's pretty cheap right now because they really haven't beaten anyone. Their whole thing was like they came in as a ranked team and then have beaten everyone they're supposed to beat, lost to everyone they're supposed to lose to. And they have the Creighton loss, the Mississippi State loss, and was that it? Or no, they lost to Nebraska 2 by 2 at home. I mean, that's the only loss that you could argue with because they were at home in that game. I think they're going to start to turn things around. Marquise Reed gets healthy after kind of battling with injuries. I still think they're getting better, and their metrics are good. Like they're still a top 35 Ken Pom team. They're top 50 in offense and defense. T rank is fine with them as well. I think they're top 40 and has the metrics too. I think once Marquise Reed gets back to full strength, they're going to have no problems. They had no issue with Lipscomb earlier today. Lipscomb, a team that already beat a high major in TCU this year, already pushed Louisville. I think with Reed back, with Shelton Mitchell still there, Elijah Thomas is not going to let his career end like this. Their depth isn't great, but I still think this is a pretty clear NCAA tournament team. Once ACC play gets underway, I think they'll steal some games.
Talk about a team that needs to make the tournament this year because next year they are going to be terrible. I mean, they lose their top 3 guys and then a 4th starter in Skara. I mean, this is going to be a rough team, especially because rewind a couple months ago, you would think that they would have Josiah James and Christian Brown on this team kind of start their rebuild with a big time recruiting class, but it looks like that they aren't going to get either. And it's going to be rough next year for Clemson. In terms of the first team I'm going to sell, Ohio State. I could not be more confident in this one. Sell. I mean, people have this team like 10th, 11th, 12th. I mean, this is a borderline top 25 team that's done what it's supposed to, outside of losing the home game to Syracuse. But I think that they're going to settle right in that 25 to 30 range. And when you're being ranked, 10, 11, 12 right now, I think it's going to be a nice profit for me selling at the peak.
Yeah, that's fair. That's one of those where, that's from a selfish fan's perspective, Northwestern gets 2 cracks at Ohio State, one at home, one on the road. You'd love to see that team stay in the top 20. Maybe it's because if they could be a top, 15 to 20 team, that's a win at home that could be, seen as an elite win. Whereas you'd really need it on the road for it to be, considered a high level win if they're in that 25 to 30 range. As they try to build a resume. I did a bunch of resume digging stuff for Northwestern this past week while I was bored. My sell that's kind of a highly ranked team right now is going to be Auburn. They turned it around with the big win over North Florida, and I could wind up brewing this one, but I was just a little scared away by that 4-game stretch we talked about on the last podcast. Dayton, UAB, NC State, and Murray State just kind of struggling through some things. They turned it over a lot more. They're still kind of figuring out their front court rotation with Okeke, Wiley, and McLemore. I don't think they're going to fall off too far, but I think they could fall from like that 8 to 10 range, maybe 12 where they are now, to 20 to 25 with some not great road losses in SEC play. I mean, they're not going to be a 5 seed anyone wants to play in the NCAA tournament, but I could see them falling into that range.
That is a strong pick there. Personally, I've flip-flopped Auburn and Kentucky between second and third in the SEC. I'm even thinking of flipping Auburn and Mississippi State, but I want to see a little more of the Bulldogs before I do that. In terms of my second sell, I'm going with Creighton. This is a team. They got the win over Clemson in the Cayman Islands Classic before Thanksgiving. That has not aged particularly well. You mentioned you bought the Clemson stock because it has depreciated this much. And Creighton's a team where they don't have any bad losses, but especially in the Oklahoma game, I know the game was, I think it was on the road at Oklahoma, but they just looked like they weren't on the same tier as Oklahoma. And a few different times that I've watched them this year in their more competitive games, they just feel like they're a step below. I don't love their whole point guard situation where it seems like whenever I watch, Zagorotsky is playing better, but Mintz is getting more minutes. It's kind of a weird situation. They are a very young team. Guy like Epperson hasn't taken the step that I thought he would. Connor Cashaw hasn't been an impact guy, but Damian Jefferson's really good. Krompel's good. Alexander's been awesome, but it just seems like people were, kind of jumped the gun after the Clemson win. This team's going to be more close to the bubble, close to the cut line, than close to the top 25.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I had Creighton as one of the stocks I'm considering holding because I don't think they're really a top 25 team, but I think they'll make the tournament. I think in Big Ten play, they'll find a way to, or Big East play, excuse me, they'll find a way to win their fair share. Alexander's so good, and they're playing better than we really all expected. I mean, I think that's the one thing that we should notice. I mean, as much as you may not believe in them where they are right now ranked, but I mean, considering what we expected preseason, Brad, I mean, it's pretty impressive to see where they are right now. I think they're only going to get better with Tyshawn Alexander is a young guy. Damian Jefferson's in his first year there. Zagorowski's first year there. I think they're going to get better as the season goes on. Hang around in that NCAA bubble mix, even though they have kind of underwhelmed in some of their bigger games, with the exception of that Clemson game.
If I could just interject there, so I had them 9th in the preseason. They're certainly going to finish higher than 9th. I think their floor is 7. I think either 6 or 7 for them. But after that Clemson win, and they played Gonzaga tough. At that point, it looked like first, second, or third was on the table. I don't think that's on the table anymore. I think probably 6 or 7 there for Creighton.
Yeah, I think that's about right. My final sell, another Big Ten school. I already did Purdue. I'm selling Minnesota. Minnesota has a gaudy record at this point. They sit at 11-2. I'm just not a believer when you put on the tape. Uh, Obviously, their Ken Palm tells that story. It's, I think, 62 in Ken Palm at the last check I had. They've kind of stumbled through their last couple bye games. Let NCAA&T hang around a little longer than they should have. Let Mount St. Mary's hang around a lot today. They lost that game at BC. They have a nice home win against Nebraska, but it's a game you should probably win at home. Like Texas A&M win, the Utah win, neither of those are really going to stand up for much. The Washington win really won't either. And so from that perspective, maybe they're a team with a gaudy win-loss record. A lot of people think is an NCAA tournament lock. I wouldn't be surprised for this team to fall off in Big Ten play. And we mentioned this a little earlier on the pod a few weeks ago, but the Big Ten's got so many good teams, and there's going to be so many games decided by 1 and 2 possessions. And how are the teams who don't necessarily have elite coaches, who don't necessarily have point guards, who are experienced, who don't have a ton of depth? How are those teams going to respond in those games? We've seen Northwestern struggle a few games in what they needed to win. They lost the Michigan game by 2. They lost the Indiana game by 2. They wore down against Oklahoma, and they don't have the best in-game coach in the Big Ten by any means in Chris Collins. They don't really have a point guard. Vic Law's doing that. They don't have a lot of depth. I think Minnesota is a team that's kind of similar. They're still kind of messing around with the Amir Coffey, Isaiah Washington pairing in the backcourt. Rich Pitino is not a guy I'm personally a huge fan of as a head coach. I think they're going to lose. I think they're going to go like 8-12 in the Big Ten. I think I would not be at all surprised if they missed the NCAA tournament.
Yeah. So for my third pick, I'm deciding between a pair of Big Ten schools and a pair of Big 12 schools, because I'm on one hand, I think that the Big 12 is being overrated this year. I think it's still going to get 7 teams in the NCAA tournament, but almost every team is worse from last year except for Oklahoma and Iowa State. TCU is probably a wash, but every other team is worse. I think people still think that West Virginia is good. Like, that's a sneaky under the radar story that they're just not very good. Baylor's not very good. And I think the teams at the top have certainly taken a step back. But I'm going to go with one of 2 Big Ten schools. Kind of teased this earlier with my bracketology predictions, but between Maryland and Iowa, I think both teams are going to take a fall from perception. I mean, Iowa's ranked right now, but they struggled to beat Bryant. I watched that game last night. That was a ugly game on both sides. But I'm going to go with Maryland here, a team that I was very low on in the preseason. They've been a touch better than I thought, but I still think that this is a team that's going to end up, kind of what you said about Minnesota, where they're just going to, fall into like 11th or 12th in the Big Ten, finish with that 7-13 or like 6-14 record or whatever, and miss the NCAA tournament. Very young team, very reliant on Anthony Cowan at the point guard position. They're not shooting it great as a team, but Bruno Fernando's been awesome. Jalen Smith's been very good. But I just think in terms of where they stack up against the rest of the league and just their overall kind of makeup and lack of experience, I think Maryland is kind of my most controversial pick to miss the NCAA tournament, which means a lot because you can really only have 1 or 2 of those picks based on the very finite and very few amount of teams in the mix.
Yeah, I think that's a fair one. I think that's pretty much the same logic with Minnesota. I think Maryland's a little more talented and they're a little younger, which will allow them to develop as the season goes on. But that's fair. I mean, I'm not huge on Maryland either. And I wrote something. It'll be up later in the week on WNURsports.com about Northwestern's bubble hopes and Maryland, a game like Maryland, game like Minnesota. Those are the games. Like if you're a bubble team, those are going to be the games. The winners of those games are going to go to the NCAA tournament. The losers aren't. Even a team like Nebraska could sneak into this mix of these bubble teams in the Big Ten. If you can have a plus 500 record against those teams, those are the teams that are going to wind up dancing, and the other ones are going to wind up left home on Selection Sunday.
And then I just wanted to kind of bring up a kind of a Gavitt Games retrospective kind of point. I mean, you see that we've each sold on 2 different Big Ten teams out of our 3 allotted cells. And I think that the Gavitt Games, in hindsight, really illustrated kind of the contrast between the Big Ten and in the Big East. Like it was kind of like a very meaningful takeaway where the top of the Big Ten is considerably better than the top of the Big East, and those teams went head to head, and the top of the Big Ten came out on top. The bottom of the Big East is considerably better than the bottom of the Big Ten. Those teams came out on top, but the middle of the Big Ten didn't get to play, right? Where like Northwestern, Maryland, Iowa, Minnesota, right? Those teams didn't have Gavitt games. Where representing the conference was like Wisconsin, Nebraska, Michigan. Those are the teams that kind of show that they're better than the top of the Big East, which is true. But the middle went untested, and I think that we're starting to sell a lot of the middle right now, which kind of shows that relationship.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I very distinctly remember us on the pod talking post Gavitt games is how much of it should we take as a retrospective and take as a kind of a criticism of the Big East and a pat on the back for the Big Ten, and it looks like we were right on. But those middle teams would have been really interesting to see in that event. A few holding teams we should do that as well, Brad. A hold for you.
Okay, so I have a big list of holds. I'm going to hold on Washington first. Now, this is a team had a couple close calls. The loss to Minnesota isn't great. They got destroyed by Auburn, right? But the resume is kind of blank. But that's an issue in the Pac-12 when there's only one chance to get a quality win, being Arizona State. But I think that they can like if they're the team that everyone like, they could still be the team that people thought in the preseason, and they could kind of have a serious run like a St. Louis in the A-10, like we're thinking run in the Pac-12. In which case, if they're 15-3, maybe that's good enough to get a bid. We've brought up multiple times how it's very thin toward the cut line. Washington could easily get in there with a gaudy record. I mean, maybe it has to be even better than 15-3, but this team could still be capable. And I think selling now would be selling too low. I think that they certainly are going to rise in terms of perception. So I think this is a pretty clear hold and kind of wait and see for me.
Yeah, I think 14-4 might even do it in the Pac-12. I wouldn't be surprised if it does, especially if you get a couple conference tournament wins. So at least put yourself on the bubble.
Yeah.
It'll depend on where those teams wind up lining up in quadrants. I'm going to hold North Carolina. I think some people are kind of selling. After the Gonzaga win, they spiked in price, if you will, and then they've had a couple uneven performances since. Obviously, there's still the Nasir Little stuff that's hanging over their heads. I think I'm still a believer that this is a top 15 team. I still think they'll be fine. I'm not necessarily in on them being a national title contender like I was in the preseason, but I don't think the stock necessarily needs to bottom out.
Yeah, that was a good one. They were on my list as well. Let's see. We'll go second hold. I'm going to hold Oklahoma. Their team I was very skeptical on. I was in wait-and-see mode. Saw them against Creighton and in Dayton too. And I think that, especially in the Creighton game, they were just clearly a tier above. I think that they're being ranked right now in the low 20s. I think that's very appropriate. And I think this team could even push for second in the Big 12. That's far from a lock. A lot of people have Texas Tech as that clear team. I think Oklahoma is certainly comparable and could make a. They're certainly gonna back up where they are now, and they could even make a move up.
Yeah, I was actually also holding Oklahoma. I just really liked them against Northwestern. Like I thought their guards are better than I thought they were. Like Miles Reynolds and Aaron Calixte are better. Christian James is fine. The front court's solid. Brady Manick can hit tough shots. I think they'll be really solid with that defense in the Big 12. They'll play pretty well, be a top 25 team or so. Another team I'm holding is Marquette. Feels like any more hype with this team would be too much than they're getting right now. But any less would feel underrated. It would feel like you're underrating this team. They really got written off after that Indiana game. They've looked great since. Marcus Howard can obviously blow up. I think they'll have a couple of inexplicable losses throughout the season, but they should still be fine, compete for a Big East title.
So was Oklahoma your third one?
But I have a couple others I have listed, so I can answer a third.
Okay. So for my third, deciding between a pair of SEC teams, Florida and Mississippi State. Florida blew out Butler last night, but was that an aberration? I mean, they've had plenty of games where they've looked pretty inept on the offensive end this year due to some struggles from Kayvon Allen and Jalen Hudson. I'll go with a Mississippi State for my hold. They're being ranked, I think, appropriately, kind of in that 20 to 17 range. They have some very good veteran players. Probably still a tier behind, like your Michigan States and like your UNC, but pretty close to them. I think this solid team is going to be probably like a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. So that's certainly a successful season in what was a very important year for Ben Howland. They're right on track to kind of fulfill the preseason expectations.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I've been impressed with how they looked. I watched a little bit against BYU. Thought they were very solid up and down the roster. I mean, they have a lot of guards who can really make a play, and it'll be a really fun SEC team to watch. A couple teams I'm considering for that last spot. One of them was a kind of a high major team, Iowa State. Wasn't fully ready to jump all in on the bandwagon of them being kind of a high level team, but as they get healthy, they could either really explode, or they could have some struggles. I think as they start to put the pieces together, maybe add these front court pieces. Maybe it's not a good thing for them to be going bigger. Maybe taking Jacobson off the floor when he's been so good. We'll see how that goes. We'll end up going with a kind of a weird one, Loyola Chicago. Here's the thing: is if you know me, I was pretty big on Loyola Chicago preseason. I didn't sell after they lost to Boston College or Nevada, which I probably should have when I watched them play Nevada, because I think I still was overrating them at the time. Then they lost the game to Ball State. They scored 40 against Maryland. They scored 42 against St. Joe's, and like everybody's just so far ditched them that the stock was not worth selling at that point, if you will. If they're going to hold them, I mean, they're still going to be fine in the Valley. I mean, Custer's still really good. He's really regressed a little bit this year, but I think he'll find his stride. Krutwig's still there. Marcus Towns is a really nice player. Once they get Lucas Williamson healthy, hopefully here Uguak can give him something. I don't see why they can't compete in the Valley, and they probably wouldn't be anything more than a 13 or 14 seed if they do dance, but I don't see why they couldn't be a little bit dangerous. I mean, they're well coached. I think Porter Mosier's still a good coach. They still got some pieces. They got the experience. The stock price is basically a penny stock at this point, but in a league where Drake might be the best team with a first-year head coach, Indiana State's a team that Greg Lansing is kind of a mediocre guy. I've never been a huge fan of his as a head coach. Obviously, you have Jordan Barnes, but the rest of the roster is still kind of not necessarily proven guys. The league is wide open. I think Loyola Chicago is worth a hold here.
Yeah, that's a really solid pick because, I mean, Illinois State's been disappointing. Southern Illinois has been disappointing. I mean, there's certainly an opportunity there for Loyola to jump up. Should we move on to like weekly picks?
Yeah, probably.
You want to each pick 3 or 4?
Let's do 4. Why not?
Okay. You want to start?
Yeah, so we're going through the games on 1-2 because we're planning to record a pod on the 3rd. Just wanted to make note of that. Why don't I start with the game that is most near and dear to my heart this week? Northwestern at Michigan State. Michigan State probably will be a double-digit favorite in this game at home on the 2nd. Northwestern's going to probably hang around, I think, if they can hit some threes. I think Nick Ward will probably put Pardon in foul trouble, which will be a challenge. And Michigan State finds a way to win it. But, I mean, that's the type of game where, like, Northwestern's whole season has been defined by not winning close games. But if they somehow win that game, they go from, most people have them outside the field and above a bracketology to, like, NCAA tournament lock. Unless they, like, lose a bad one or two.
So how do you, like as like from a fan's mindset, do you look at this as like realistic, or do you think it's like a long shot?
I think it's somewhat of a long shot, but it's realistic enough that I'll talk myself into us winning, if that
That
makes
was
sense.
kind of reminds me of last year, Providence at Xavier coming down the stretch of the season. We had already beat them at home, I think, at that point, and I was in class, and I brought up the game, and we had like cut it to like 6 or something. Then we had like a stretch of bad turnovers. I almost like screamed out in my class. It's like, motherfucker, just like you're sitting there, and there was like a terrible turnover, and you just kind of watch the comeback like slip away. But that just made me thought of that. But
I mean, if Ryan Taylor hits threes and like Vic Law's doing his thing and AJ Turner plays his game, Anthony Gaines can defend. If you get something out of one of the two freshmen, I think Northwestern can beat anyone in the country. I mean, we saw them push Michigan right to the wire. There's a realistic way that Northwestern wins that Michigan game. They could have easily beaten Indiana on the road. I mean, the stranger things have happened. I think the Michigan State team's probably just a little too good on the road and in a tough environment. But I'm excited to see how they answer the bell.
So you going with Michigan State?
I am.
This kind of leads me. I'm picking Michigan State as well, but in terms of the next game that I'm picking, this kind of reminds me of it. Thinking about this earlier, there aren't really any teams that seem unbeatable, and the amount of teams where it seems super unlikely that you'll win, even at this school. I mean, it's what, 6 or 7 schools where like if you're like at Tennessee, it's like, all right, this is super unlikely, like at Gonzaga. But I think a vast majority of the schools, even schools in the top 10, playing on the road at that place isn't as insurmountable as it normally would be playing at like the 9th best or 10th best school. But that's, I'm going to pick Creighton at Providence tomorrow. I'll be there, 4:00 tip. I think Providence is going to win this one. They've certainly played better of late. The defense has been better, and they've gotten some solid contributions from Malik White and Isaiah Jackson as kind of veteran role players. But in terms of kind of predicting the Big East, it's very hard as a fan of a team that could reasonably – that everyone's going to have Providence like 6th or 7th, right? It's very difficult for me to not be super optimistic because almost every game you look at, it feels winnable. Like they're probably going to be favored every home game. And the road games aren't going to feel super insurmountable. So it's very plausible in my brain to see like 12-6, 13-5, because you can just go down the list and say win, win, win. But anyhow, that's the amount of restraint that it took for me not to put 10-8 as my prediction for Providence.
Yeah, no, it's really tough. I mean, this is a game. I was on a podcast in Vegas that's going to actually air tomorrow. They asked me about this Creighton Providence game. It's one of those games. It's like a must-win for Providence. It feels like a 50-50 game, and it's two teams probably could dance, but it still feels like an absolute must-win game. I think Providence finds a way at home. They're a tough team to beat at the dunk.
They lose. I will be indescribably the word is crushed. I mean, I'll just be as happy as I was for that win at Texas. I mean, I'll just be absolutely deflated.
Yeah, definitely. Next game I'll pick, Texas at Kansas State. I think this is an interesting game. Kansas State, one of the more underrated home environments in college basketball. I always like watch games there, and I'm like, that's a tough place to play. Kansas State could really use this game. The Big 12 last year was really absurd, where like no one won on the road. Like that was the whole thing. Was like everyone won, everyone protected home court. I could see that going this way this year. Even though I'm not a huge Kansas State believer, I'll pick Kansas State.
I'm going to pick Texas here. I think Kerwin Roach should be back. He missed the Providence game with the stomach bug. And I think Texas, I considered buying them. I think they are a perfect kind of buy candidate. I mean, they have a very good guard in Roach. They have a younger team that's coming together. Jackson Hayes is really a spectacular player and prospect. I think he'll be a lottery pick, or if not a mid first round pick in this year's draft. So they have a ton of talent, ton of size and length. And Kansas State is a team that's been super unimpressive, and Dean Wade is out. I mean, they let George Mason into the game last night. They seem to have trouble scoring the ball. So I think that this will be a rock fight, and Texas might win like 50-48 here.
Yeah, it's going to be super ugly. Completely agree.
My pick, another kind of interesting litmus test game here. Temple at Central Florida. Two teams that they're pretty bubbly right now. I think Temple probably has a slightly better resume at this point, but I'm going to go with UCF, the home team. I think that they're the better team. And with their senior big three of Taco Fall, Aubrey Dawkins, and BJ Taylor, that's a ton of talent. I think that the defense gets it done here for the Knights.
Yeah, UCF at home. I think Temple struggled to get to the rim with Fall. Fall protecting it. I think UCF wins this game pretty comfortably.
You're up for number 3.
This is a tough one. I'll do Iowa at Purdue. I think this is a really interesting game. Really interesting Big Ten slate over the next couple of days. I think Purdue at home. This is the game. If Purdue's gonna be an NCAA tournament team, or depending on their seed certainly, but if they're gonna be a tournament team to begin with, they're gonna have to win games like this at home, and they've made a living off of it. I think Mackey Arena is too tough a place to play. I hate just picking home teams, but I'm gonna do it again. I think Purdue's gonna win this game. Carson Edwards gonna have a big one.
Also picking Purdue. I think Iowa's coming back to earth. I mean, they didn't have Luka Garza against Brown, but you need to. I mean, that was just an ugly showing. Missed free throws, sloppy play. They're certainly trending in the wrong direction, and they're kind of their big wins from early in the season have certainly depreciated. That threesome in the 2K Classic of Oregon, Syracuse, and UConn are all. I mean, UConn's probably about where people thought in the preseason, but Syracuse and Oregon are considerably worse. So Iowa's losing some steam here. I'm going with Purdue, which I detailed earlier about why I'm buying them at this point.
Yeah, that's a good call. Your next pick.
All right, 4th game. I think we'll. I'll go with Seton Hall over Xavier on the road. I think a lot of people, kind of similar to how the story about how West Virginia has been bad is kind of flying under the radar. I think the point that Xavier's been bad is really flying under the radar. I've seen people say Villanova's the most disappointing team in the Big East, or Georgetown. I think it's clearly Xavier. I mean, this is a team that on paper looked like they should be a borderline top 25 team in the preseason. They should have a great defense. And Gooden and Marshall could elevate to first team or second team all Big East level. None of those things are true. The defense is terrible. Gooden has taken a step back. Marshall's wild. I mean, this has just been a super disappointing Xavier team.
Yeah, I'm starting to wonder if the grad transfer bubble is going to burst this offseason, where everybody's more and more people are going to keep trying to grad transfer, and eventually teams are just not going to want that. The elite teams aren't going to want them as much as they have in the past. I mean, Xavier is a solid example of this. I mean, I would say all of their grad transfers, other than maybe Hankins, have been a little bit disappointing. It could be like the NEC, where there was the 1 year where all the NEC guys tried to transfer up, and Nizri Zuzua couldn't, struggled for a while to find a spot. Nevada eventually took him. Corey Henson took forever to find a spot. Quincy
eventually took him,
but no one took him. No one else was really that interested. I'm trying to think of a couple other guys, but that year, kind of the bubble burst. And then this last offseason, Jonah Antonio couldn't get a high major. A couple of the NEC guys who did wind up transferring, but a few less did wind up transferring. So I think it could be like that for the grad transfers this year. Seton Hall on the road, it's tough to win on the road in college basketball, but Xavier's a mess. Seton Hall wins this one.
So we should have one more, I believe. Yeah, yes. And then in terms of the grad transfers, I mean, I overrated so many of these grad transfers. I mean, from Joe Cremo, Ryan Wellage, I mean, Joe Chartouni, Torian Thompson was a sit-out transfer, but there's certainly a long list of grad transfers that I overrated. Wait, it's your pick right now, right?
Yes, indeed. Marquette at St. John's, I think, is the final game I wanted to pick. But just a super interesting basketball game. St. John's could really use this game at home. Marquette has been shooting the absolute cover off of it. I think St. John's is going to come out energized and focused in a game that they could really use. And Marquette, maybe a little sleepy after the new year, playing a St. John's team that's going to be able to play. St. John's wins this one by 7.
I also think St. John's gets the win here, which would be a much-needed boost for their resume. Yeah, you touched on this earlier, but the Marquette bubble is going to pop soon. I mean, they've been hyped so much. I know Gary Parrish has been taking some heat for not having Marquette very highly in his rankings. He has them like 25th, but that's perfectly reasonable. I mean, all their big wins were at home, and then the Louisville neutral win, which was like a overtime, or if not even double overtime. I don't remember exactly, but I think between the home wins and then Louisville being a little overvalued, I think Marquette is certainly more susceptible as the league favorite than people are giving credit to.
Yeah, completely agree. And you have the last pick?
Last pick. I will go with Nebraska over Maryland. Kind of doubling down on my Maryland hate, I guess. I just don't see it with this team. Even there was a brief kind of moment where it looked like Maryland was going to be good and I was going to be wrong, but I think I'm back to being staunch in my belief with this Maryland team.
Yeah, this is once again one of these games where if Nebraska wants to prove it can win on the road, this is a perfect opportunity. I'm always wary, cross country flight pretty much to go play Maryland. Tough road environment. I think Nebraska does come up with the win though.
That'll do it for today, right?
Yes, indeed. Appreciate all of y'all listening. I hope you all have a wonderful new year. We will be back on Thursday night with another episode breaking down a busy few days in hoops. Meanwhile, hope you enjoy maybe the Rose Bowl, some college football. Hopefully I'm not watching Pat Fitzgerald coach Northwestern for the last time because that rumor's floating around. We'll see what happens. Enjoy your sports week. Hopefully you have some time off from work. You can watch the games, watch some hoops, watch some football, enjoy some time with your families. Appreciate you all listening once again. Please subscribe to the podcast, give it a nice rating wherever you find us so we can continue to reach more listeners. Have a great night, everybody.